Okay, we're seeing somebody from Assam, Guwahati, Langkarding. Okay, many people from Shillong itself. Nongstoin, hello from Nongstoin. Yes. St. Mary CTE. Somebody as close as Laimkra. Okay, if you look at your chat box, we will be putting up a link for the live broadcast on YouTube. So if you want to share this link with your friends, you can do so. Or if you want to watch this on YouTube, you can click on the link and go to YouTube where it is being broadcasted. We are seeing people from Mokerwat, from Nongra, Umroi, Raliang, West Jante Hills. Wow, Raliang, very far off place. Yes. Sora. Thank you, people, for joining us. We are happy to have you with us today. Any more people joining? Do let us know where you're joining us from. Good afternoon, everybody. We will be beginning in another 2 minutes to go. Mizoram. All right. Okay, we have somebody joining us from Nehu, a research scholar. All right, right now, if you look at the chat box, you'll be able to find the link to the YouTube channel that we will be hosting, broadcasting our webinar today. You can click on that to watch on YouTube, or you can share it with your friends. The recording of this webinar will be made available on the channel of the college. You can come back after, let's say after 24 hours, it will be ready. It'll be up and ready on the YouTube channel, and you can go back to watch this webinar after it has been uploaded to the YouTube channel. Yes. Yeah, if you log out from Zoom, you can still watch it on YouTube, but you will not be able to share your comments or your feedback. Right, another 17 seconds to go. Right, welcome dear attendees to our webinar on grassroots governance and contribution of traditional institutions in the management of COVID-19 in Meghalaya, organized by the Department of Political Science, St. Anthony's College, Shillong, Meghalaya, under the aegis of the Internal Quality Assurance Cell of St. Anthony's College, in collaboration with St. Anthony's Extension College, Mindihati, Meghalaya. Dear attendees, this webinar is being live streamed also on YouTube. You can check the chat box for the link. Kindly share it with people you would like to invite to attend the webinar. As we begin, I would like to acknowledge the presence and participation of Reverend Father Dr. Joby Joseph, SDB Rector, St. Anthony's College, Reverend Brother Dr. Albert L. Dakar, SDB, Principal, St. Anthony's College, Dr. Rakal Purkhyasta, Head, Department of Political Science, St. Anthony's College, Mr. Gregorius Karomnoy, Coordinator IQAC, St. Anthony's College, Reverend Father George Shining Linkoy, Principal, St. Anthony's College, St. Anthony's Extension College, Vindihati, and our three resource persons who will be formally introduced before they speak. We shall begin with a word of prayer by Reverend Father Dr. Joby Joseph. Reverend Father, over to you for a word of prayer.
Okay, let's place ourselves in the presence of God as we begin this seminar on local governance, particular to our traditional bodies of governance, and especially for placing our state, the state of Meghalaya, before the Lord. We turn to Him in prayer, Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. God our Father, we place ourselves in the presence of God. We ask you to be with us during this day. In a very particular way, we pray for all of us. We pray for the whole world. We pray in particular for our country and our state today, and for all its leaders, that you guide and lead us, especially at this time of crisis, fear, anxiety, and sickness. May you take control. May you be with us. And we pray in a very special way for all of us. We pray, remember, especially today and every day, doctors, nurses, people in the administration, in the governance, who take time and toil for the needy, the sick, and look after those in suffering. We pray for our resource persons, Professor Marco, Sir Ardent, and we pray that this event will be a point of experience for all of us. Especially, we remember all the participants, attendees who are with us on both social platforms. May they be inspired. May they find ways, means to bring themselves into better citizens for the country and in state in particular. We listen to a reading from Prophet Micah, chapter 6, verses 8. What does the Lord ask of us? Only this: to do justice, to love tenderly, and to walk humbly before Him in God's name. God our Father, bring your justice into our hearts. Make love a reality in our dealings, and may we walk before you in humility. In your precious name, Lord, we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, Father, for leading us in the word of prayer. I have the privilege of inviting Reverend Brother Dr. Albert Eldekar, the principal of St. Anthony's College, to deliver the welcome note. Over to you, brother.
Am I audible, Jacob?
Yes, brother.
Reverend Father Dr. Joby Joseph, Dr. Rakhal Purkayastha, Professor Gregorius Karumnoit, Reverend Father George Shining Linkoy, Dr. Marco Mitri, Mr. Aden Baseomoit, Dr. Batskem Marbo, faculties of the Department of Political Science, members of the organizing and technical teams, and all valued attendees. It brings great joy in extending to each one of you a warm welcome to this webinar being organized by the Department of Political Science, St. Anthony's College, Shillong, under the aegis of the internal quality assurance cells of the college and in collaboration with St. Anthony's Extension College, Bindihati. I am very pleased with the fact that our departments are taking the initiative to organize webinars such as the present on themes that are pertinent to us as individuals and as a society today. The pandemic has a huge impact on all of us and has caused untold appalling damages both to people and structures. There is not one nation in the world which has not been touched by it. Economies, governments, religious organizations, and societal institutions are being pushed to the brink of collapse by the pandemic. Multinational companies, corporations, business enterprises are either shutting down their businesses or shrinking their area of operation in the wake of the pandemic. Yes, the picture is grim, but there is hope. People and organizations are working individually and collectively to counter the impact of the pandemic and are pushing back in every way possible. The impact of their effort may not be seen at the moment, but if they continue to push hard against it long enough, there is a chance that they will overcome it. And we are part of that initiative. Very often when we talk about addressing national emergencies, pandemics such as the present, natural calamities, and so on, we always think of large organized institutions as the government at the national level and organization at the international levels. Very rarely do we think of small bodies and agencies in such cases, and in many cases they are always eclipsed by the actions of larger bodies and agencies. This webinar turns the spotlight from the efforts of governments, both at the national and the state levels, and puts it on institutions and bodies that many of us would not have thought of at the present moment. And I feel that these smaller bodies have as much a role to play in addressing the impact of the pandemic as any other bigger bodies do. The theme of the webinar, Grassroots Governance and Contribution of Traditional Institutions in the Management of COVID-19 in Meghalaya, is an attempt made by the Department of Political Science to examine and explore the impact of such small bodies in the present context. I'm sure that after Dr. Rakhal Purkayastha has given his introduction to the theme, we shall be able to grasp the essence and the scope of the theme even further. Speaking as one outside of the realm of political science as a field of study, I will only briefly share my thoughts as evoked by the theme on what I expect to learn from the session scheduled to be held during this webinar. Grassroots governance is an important aspect of democracy which has been only recently introduced to the world, and very recently in terms of our country. In broad terms, grassroots governance is a people, community-driven activity at the lowest level of the political ladder, but having a very strong social and communal structure. Even though in many ways it can be seen to be very basic in its function and form, it has been said to have a direct implication on the lives of people, operating at the levels of villages, localities, and regions. It plays a pivotal role in the development of rural communities. I am proud of the fact that our country, in its 64th Amendment of 1989 of the Constitution, during the time of Rajiv Gandhi, and its 73rd Amendment of 1992 of the Constitution during the time of P.B. Narasimha Rao, took the initiative to embrace and consolidate the movement for the establishment of grassroots levels of governance. The initiative taken by a country in this regard to engender human effectiveness by empowering and mobilizing ordinary people at the grassroots level has borne much fruit and will continue to do so. Today, we shall have the privilege of hearing how our traditional institutions in the state of Meghalaya have worked during the last many months in address the issues raised by the pandemic. Our traditional institution functioning at the level of the Shinong, Rai, and the Hima have contributed much to the growth, welfare, and progress of the local people. In many areas of the state, we are still very much attached to or have great affinity to the institution that exists at these three levels, one of them being our village darbar or council. These institutions play a great role in implementing government schemes at the local level and also assist in national level events such as election, disseminating information on schemes and policies, governing communities, and so on and so forth. It will be a wonderful opportunity for us to learn from our esteemed resource persons from different backgrounds how these local traditional institutions have assisted in managing COVID-19 in Meghalaya thus far. I would like to close my very brief welcome address by expressing my gratitude to the three resource persons for accepting our invitation to participate in our webinar, and to the Department of Political Science and all the faculties and staff involved in the hosting of the webinar. I would like to invite all of you attendees to actively participate by sending in your comments, questions, and thoughts on the topics to be addressed by our resource persons. Once again, allow me to reiterate my warmest welcome to all of you. Thank you. God bless you. Evermore, better ever.
Thank you very much, brother, for setting the tone for our webinar today and for giving us a brief look at what governance, grassroots governance is. And to continue in that line of thought, I have the pleasure of inviting Dr. Rakhal K. Purkayastha to join us online to deliver his introductory remarks at this moment. Over to you, sir.
Good evening to all panelists and participants. With the lockdown declared in the country in view of COVID-19 pandemic from March 2020 onwards, in our day-to-day conversation with our younger colleagues and in the department and across the department, we used to often discuss on the proactive role played by the Darbar in containing this menace in the city. Steps which we saw ourselves taken by the Darbar included dissemination of information and awareness. Almost every morning, evening, we used to hear on the loudspeaker the step that should be taken by the residents in order to contain the disease. We saw the Darbar were very proactive in enforcement of lockdown. They also took the task of contact tracing, community quarantine services. It is they who we saw coming with relief measure for the needy people. We saw the Darbar also helping in revival of livelihood. Now, just about 10 days back, my friend and my colleague, Bright Star and Recordius, came up with the idea that why not we hold a webinar on the role of grassroots institutions in containing COVID-19 crisis in Meghalaya. Compared to the rest of the country, Meghalaya is still doing better, though lately in the month of July, we had seen slight increase in the cases, but most of these cases comes from the central forces, which falls outside the purview of local institutions. We thought that we should look into what are the problems they are facing, what are the strengths they have, and how they are approaching in containing this pandemic. When we talked to Father Joby and Brother Albert, they were very encouraging. And with this webinar was organized. I, along with all other participants, will look forward more on hearing from the panelists who will be talking about how the Darbar, the role they have played in containing this pandemic. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir, for your introductory remarks. I know we are all eager to listen to our speakers. Before I introduce them to you, here are some guidelines that attendees are to follow if they want to interact with our speakers. Kindly use the Q&A box to send your questions to the speakers. If you put it on the chat box, we will not be able to track your questions and they will get lost in the threads. So if you want to ask them a question, please do mention the name of the speakers that you are directing your questions to. And please also try and make your questions as short and as straight to the point as possible so that we will be able to address the questions accordingly. So our speakers are going to speak for 25 minutes each. And after all the three of them have finished their talks, we are going to have a 10-minute Q&A session to be moderated by Mr. Brightstar Well Marbanyang, Assistant Professor, Department of Political Science, St. Anthony's College. Should we have enough time on our hands, we will extend the Q&A session by some more time, maybe another 4 to 5 minutes. Now, I'm going to share the screen and I'm going to introduce you to our speakers in the order in which they will be speaking. So give me a minute while I share the screen. And so our first speaker is Dr. Matskem Marbo. He's an assistant professor, Department of Political Science at the undergraduate level at Synod College, Shillong, Meghalaya. He will be addressing the theme, the grassroots traditional institutions as agencies of grassroots governance. Dr. Marco B. Mitri is an associate professor and also head of the Department of History at Union Christian College, Shillong, Meghalaya. He's also the village head, or as we call it in Khasi, the Rangbak Shillong, of Maulai Kintan Masar, Shillong, Meghalaya. He will be giving an experiential account of the involvement of traditional institutions in the management of COVID-19 and beyond, success and challenges. We are also very happy to have with us Mr. Arden M. Basarimut. He's a former member of the Legislative Assembly. He's a former member of the District Council. He's a former Chief Executive Member of the Khasi Hills Autonomous District Council. At present, he's the convener of the Yada Ilakari Revolution, Shillong Meghalaya, and he will be discussing the prospects of recognition and empowerment of the grassroots traditional institutions perspective. So these are our three speakers, and we will, without further ado, go over to our first speaker, who is Dr. Batskem Marbot. Over to you, sir, for your presentation. So we're waiting for, yes, but Dr. Batskem is online. Welcome, sir. Over to you. Can you please unmute, sir? Yes, thank you. Over to you.
Okay. So I'm sharing the screen. Good evening to Father Joby. Good evening to Father Reverend, Brother Albert, the principal of the college, and the head of the Department of Political Science, St. Anthony's College, the coordinators of this webinar, the moderator of this webinar, and all the participants of this seminar. The topic that I have been assigned to speak this evening is on the grassroots traditional institutions as agencies of grassroots governance. In this topic, or this paper, I would like to try to bring the theoretical perspective about the position of the traditional institutions in the state of Meghalaya in the context of governance. And in fact, the recent comment made by the surveillance officer of the World Health Organization, Dr. N. Roy, saying that Meghalaya has a lot to teach to the rest of the country regarding the tackling of the COVID-19 pandemic. It speaks volumes of the activities and the successes of the traditional institutions that they have been playing in the state of Meghalaya in implementing, in involving in the activities of the state. In fact, I would say that the comment of the WHO official is another stamp of approval on the important role of the traditional institutions at a grassroots level, which is at the village level, which involve or which are the Nokmas, the Rangba Shlong, the Sardar, and the Wahej Chnong that we have in Chanta Hills. But however, in this presentation, I will not talk about what are the activities that the traditional institutions have been doing, because the next speaker after me will be speaking a lot and he has more experiences in this matter. In fact, I will stick to the topic that have been given, and that is the grassroots traditional institutions as the agencies of grassroots governance in the state of Meghalaya. You see, when we talk about traditional institutions, I would take this hypothesis in the state of Meghalaya. I will not, as I said in the beginning, I will not dwell on how these traditional institutions, they have been playing a role which have been given the task by the state government in tackling this COVID-19 pandemic that we are currently having. Rather, I will try to theoretically establish whether these traditional institutions, they are the agencies, they are the institutions of grassroots governance in the state or not. And if not, it is the urgent need of the time that the state government and the central government, they should integrate, they should recognize, and they should involve constitutionally, statutorily into the process of governance as the institutions of governance. In fact, I will take the position, or I will make this hypothesis that traditional institutions, though they are involved in the process of grassroots governance extensively, and in fact, the government at the state level, or even at the district, at the autonomous district councils, they would not reach anywhere without involving these traditional institutions. But I would say that these traditional institutions, in spite of the extensive involvement in the process of grassroots governance, they are themselves not the institutions or not the agencies of grassroots governance because of certain inhibitions or because of certain factors. In fact, to support my hypothesis that the traditional institutions are yet to be the formalized institutions of grassroots governance in the state of Meghalaya, I take here the support of two things. One is their incongruence with the concept of governance at present. And the second, they are not local government or the local authority within the Indian Constitution. Let us now try to establish the context of traditional institutions within the concept of governance. You see, this traditional institution, the concept of governance is a concept that was introduced, that was given to us by the World Bank in 1989 in the report, The Sub-Saharan Africa from Crisis to Sustainable Growth. It was in this report that the World Bank came up for the first time with this idea of governance. And in fact, this concept of governance was used in the context or for the very fact that in spite of the development projects that have been implemented, that were implemented in the region as planned, as funded by the World Bank, but these countries in the sub-Saharan African region, they continue to be backward and the poverty was not reducing. And therefore the World Bank came up with this idea that there might be a problem with how the government is managing the resources, is managing its the resources for development, and therefore they come about with this idea of governance. And since then, the idea of governance became more and more and increasingly accepted in the policy matter, in the policy making, and in the sphere of the academics. And in 1992, in its governance and development, the World Bank laid stress on 3 principles for governance. And these 3 principles include efficiency, accountability, and transparency. And therefore, when you look at these 3 principles that the World Bank is dwelling the concept of governance, you would find that the concept of governance is very much linked with liberal democracy. And in fact, this idea of governance is linked with the neoliberal democracy, to be more precise. And the World Bank defines governance as the manner in which power is exercised in the management of countries' economic and social resources for development. Here, the main purpose of the World Bank is to attain development and reduction of poverty, and how the resources in the country should be used towards the achieving of those objectives. And in fact, Stoker, he says that the World Bank's definition or the World Bank's perspective of governance is limited to the design of efficient and accountable government. When you look at the traditional institutions in Meghalaya in the context of governance, you would find that the traditional institutions are not really falling in line with this concept of governance. The fact remains that the traditional institutions, they are yet to be the regional legal authority, which is based on laws, which is based on the rule of law, and in fact, which is, we can say, based on the liberal democratic principles. The traditional institutions in Meghalaya, even today, are very much based on the traditional practices that we have been following. In fact, when we talk about the democratic principles, we have equality, inclusiveness, transparency, rule of law. But these traditional institutions, they don't have these, or they don't stick, or they don't incorporate these democratic principles in their functioning. Rather, instead of concerning more with development, with the management of the resources, with the, keeping in mind development with an aim to reduce poverty, the traditional institutions, they are more concerned with maintaining, sustaining, and advancing ethnic and cultural identity. And in fact, the possibility of democratizing the traditional institution in the liberal sense in the state of Meghalaya is rather difficult in the present context, unless and until we go for certain reforms and we go for certain steps towards the evolution of the traditional institutions to a higher level from the perspective of liberal democracy. Because you'd find that the traditional institutions and the people in our state from the tribal communities, we are very much concerned about our ethnic identity, and we are very much territorial in nature. Our territoriality is expressed not only in context or in relation with the people from other ethnic communities, but even within the same ethnic community also, we exhibit this character of territoriality, the sense that we have the possession, we have the sense that this area belongs to us and we should not share with the others, the area and its resources. And in fact, you'll find that certain localities, certain villages in our state, they would reserve the offices of the Rang Bashnong only to a certain clan, because these clans were the founding clans in that particular area, and they were the dominant clan. And therefore, you'd find that this principle of equality of all the residents in that particular village, the principle of inclusiveness of everyone, every adult residing in that particular locality is not being incorporated in the operation of the traditional institutions in the state. And therefore, in that context, I argue or I say that the traditional institutions at present, they are not running in congruence with the idea or the concept of governance. And another reason that I call the traditional institutions at present, they are not the agencies, though they are extensively involved in the process. There is a difference between process and being the agency. As in the process, there's no doubt they have been extensively involved, and they are continuing, and they will continue in the future also. But as the institution, they are yet to be the institution or the agency of governance. Here, I base my argument on the fact that, on the test that whether these traditional institutions are the local government, are the local authority within the Indian Constitution, or whether they are part of the meaning of the state that we have in the Indian Constitution. In order to clarify, or in order to answer this question, I bring three things here. The first thing, we will look into Article 12 of the Indian Constitution, which defines the state. And then Section 2H of the Right to Information Act, which defines what are the public authorities which are required to be accountable to the people of the country. And the next criteria that I would bring here is the funding of the traditional institutions. When you look at the Article 12 of the Indian Constitution, though this article is made, the definition of the state in this article is made in the context of the fundamental rights, but I will use this also in the context of the traditional institutions. Here, the article states that state includes the government, and Parliament of India, and the government and the legislature of each of the states, and all the local or order authorities within the territory of India or under the control of the government of India. Here, if the traditional institutions, they are the local authority, then it can be understood as being part of the state of India. But this one we will try to see whether it is part of the Indian state or not. According to Section 2H of the Right to Information Act 2005, the public authorities, it is defined as, or it means as any authority or body or institution of self-government established or constituted by or under the Constitution, by any other law made by Parliament, by any other law made by state legislature, by notification issued or order made by the appropriate government, and includes any body owned, controlled, or substantially financed non-government organization substantially financed directly or indirectly by funds provided by the appropriate government. Here, I'm very interested to find the word financed and the funds, so that we will come to, to consider these terms or these criteria in understanding the traditional institutions as the local authority in a state. And therefore, when you look at the Article 12 and Article 2, and also the funding pattern or the financing pattern, I would say that though the traditional institutions in Meghalaya can be remotely connected to the idea of authority within the definition of Article 12 and Section 2H of the Right to Information Act, I said here can be remotely connected. But the very fact that these organizations or these institutions are not financed and not maintained by the public fund of the Indian state, therefore, they cannot be called as being part of the meaning of state as defined in the Indian Constitution in the proper sense of the term, or from the perspective of governance. It may be noted that the traditional institution can be rationalized, can be formalized, can be localized, and can be made to fall within the ambit of the meaning of the state, of the local government, or local authority, provided there is a law to include them. For example, the Panchayati Raj institutions that we have in the rest of India and in some states in Northeast also, including, you would find that these Panchayati Raj institutions, they were the traditional institutions that had been in existence, and their existence can be traced to the ancient period. But in 1992, by the 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act, they have been incorporated in the Indian Constitution, and now they have become part and parcel of the Indian state, and they have been made as a local government to manage the resources at the local level for local development. In the context of the traditional institutions that we have in our state, yes, there is no doubt that we have certain legislations, notifications, orders from the government, recognizing, acknowledging the existence of the traditional institutions at the grassroots level, and recognizing their traditional powers and functions. There's no doubt about it. For example, we have the laws like the United Khasi Jaintia Hills Autonomous District Administration of Justice Rules 1953, the Garo Hills Autonomous District Administration of Justice Rules 1953, which formalized the judicial powers of the traditional institutions. And also in the context of the Khasi Hills, we have the United Khasi Chandy Hills Autonomous District Appointment and Succession of Chiefs and Headmen Acts 1959. However, though this act of 1959, they recognize the existence of the traditional institutions at the grassroots level, but they have not formalized the powers and functions of these traditional institutions. And in fact, in Garo Hills, by 1958, they had the Garo Hills District Constitution of Village Council Act, which tried to formalize the powers and functions of the traditional institutions. However, the absence of a proper legislation to make and to integrate the traditional institutions with the Indian state, you would find that we reached to a situation where the Meghalaya High Court, I hope every one of us will remember, and this incident generated a lot of passion in the state of Meghalaya, particularly in Shillong, where in the writ petition civil case 363 of 2014, the Meghalaya High Court reduced the status of headmen and traditional institutions in Khasi Chandy Hills to a mere social welfare organization. And in fact, this is the wording of the High Court ruling. And in fact, this has generated, as I said earlier, a lot of or a high degree of passion, and there was a lot of protest and march by the people in order to legalize, in order to recognize the traditional institutions in the state. However, it's very interesting that in this particular writ petition in 2014, the Sardar of Parakmai village, he was made as the respondent. And when he was made as a respondent in the writ petition, it means that that respondent, he represents the Indian state. And therefore, in this particular case, the traditional institution is made as, recognized as being part of the Indian state, where, which they cannot, in fact, violate the fundamental rights of the Indian citizens. However, in the light of the 2014 High Court judgment, the KHDC and the HEDC and even the state government, they tried to come up with legislations with ordinance to legalize the powers and functions of the existence of the traditional institutions in the state. However, while the Chandy Hills Autonomous District Council, they were successful, but in regard of the KHDC, they were so far the bill prepared by them, which is called the Village Administration Bill of 2015, is yet to see the light of the day. Meanwhile, in 2015 itself, we had the Meghalaya Local Administration Empowerment of Traditional Institutions, Traditional Bodies, and Headmen in Governance and Public Delivery System Ordinance 2015. And in fact, the 2016 Supreme Court ruling is not the ruling. In fact, it was the interim order in the appeal filed by the KHDC versus the state of Meghalaya against the ruling of the High Court, delegalizing the position of the traditional institutions. The Supreme Court ruled that the persons occupying the post of headman may continue to function subject to various instructions framed by the Autonomous District Council as law under the 6th schedule to the Constitution, meaning that the traditional institutions, they have to function strictly and not beyond the powers and functions as given by the 6th schedule. Yes, as I stated earlier, the state government has incorporated the traditional institutions in the process of implementation of almost all the rural development programs. And we cannot imagine a situation where the government would be successful in implementing those programs, those policies, without the involvement of the traditional institutions. But having those laws, as I said before, that I have flashed on the screen, recognizing the existence of the traditional institutions, and also that traditional institutions have been involved in the process of local government or in the process of governance, but this is not enough to consider them as local government or the local authority within the Indian constitution even today. In fact, the Durbarshnong, the office of the headman and Nokma that we have, they are not the local government, because here I would say that they don't have the proper authority, whether in the sphere of legislation, whether in the sphere of finance. Rather, are simply made as the extended executive wing of the state government and the autonomous district council. In fact, they are given responsibilities without power, and rather much power, I would say. To some extent, they may have powers, but not really as the local government. And also, I would say that the traditional institutions are yet to be the institutions of local government and to be the institutions of local governance, because they are yet to be the institutions to be maintained by the Indian state. Like in the Panchayati Raj institutions, they are very much part of the Indian state. They are very much the local government. They are maintained by the fund from the public fund of the Indian state, and therefore they are expected to be accountable and to provide governance. But in the case of the traditional institutions, they are funded, I would say, privately. Or I would argue that in the light of these facts that I have just shared, the traditional institutions in Meghalaya, they are functioning like the non-governmental organizations, not exactly as the local government, or like the civil society groups, which have been accorded a recognized status by the Indian state to some extent. And in fact, when you look at the traditional institutions, not as being not part of the being not part of the Indian state, therefore you'd find that there is no hierarchical arrangement also of the traditional institutions either with the autonomous district council or with the state government. And in fact, we have a situation where, a very confusing situation, where both the state governments and the autonomous district councils, they establish direct relationship with them separately and independently. And here, therefore, I would like to say that being the private organizations and falling outside the ambit of the idea and definition of public authority, the traditional institutions remain largely non-mandated statutorily to function in a transparent and accountable manner, and many of the functions even today remain arbitrary in nature. And to conclude, I would sum up my discussion by saying that the traditional institutions are not local government, they are not local authority within the Indian Constitution. They remain traditional institutions, they are yet to be rationalized, they are yet to be legalized institution. However, they are involved in the process of governance, though they are not the institutions of governance. And also, how I would say that they have the potential to emerge and to be made as the agency of grassroots governance in the state of Meghalaya. But reforms are needed on the part of the traditional institutions, include those democratic principles, and at the same time, as these traditional institutions, they carry the sentiments of the tribal people, the government of India and the government of Meghalaya, as well as the autonomous district council, need to accommodate them, need to understand the sentiments of the people and try to be more liberal in accommodating them and integrate them in the Indian state and make them as the institutions of local government, which have the huge potential to bring about development at the local level. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, sir. You have introduced some political and historical aspects of traditional institutions, as well as raising some interesting issues, which I believe other speakers might want to address later. So thank you so much, Dr. Batskem Marbo, for your presentation. We will now go over to Dr. Marco B. Mitri, who will share with us his experiences and findings working on the working of one of our traditional institutions in Shillong. So over to you, sir, for your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Jacob. And first of all, I'd like to wish a good evening to all my participants for today's webinar. I would truly delighted to be part of this webinar on grassroots governance and contribution to traditional institutions in the management of COVID-19 in Meghalaya. I would like to thank the Principal of St. Anthony's, the Department of Political Science, and the organizers for inviting me to be one of the resource persons. To introduce myself a bit, because I sit here as one of the headmen, not necessarily an academician, but I have to introduce myself as an academician by profession, but I've also been involved in community activities and social activities for the last 25 years or so. Over the last 9 years, I have been more active in the village council or the village Dorbar as a hetman of a village called Kintam Masar, a locality in Molai, which houses about 4,000 souls and in 1,300 households. So in my dual engagement, I must say that I cannot really draw a line of comparison as to which of the two roles is more important than the other, as far as human relations and community service is concerned. And that, of course, if I have the privilege to leave aside the fact concerning my source of livelihood. Through my experience as a teacher and a hetman, I find both these activities do complement each other perfectly. And this adds a lot of new insights to me. So coming from the field of social science and humanities, my active participation in the everyday affairs of the community has made a lot of positive impact even to my academic and scholarly pursuit. So speaking on the theme of my discussion today, which is an experiential account of the involvement of the traditional institutions in the management of COVID-19 and beyond, success and challenges, I would like to bring firstly the relationship between the traditional institutions and the modern machineries of governments and the ongoing social battle against COVID-19 somehow offers a very ideal subject to judge the interplay between tradition and the so-called modernity in public management and non-formalized governance. I would theme this sub-theme as the practical encounter. First, I'm truly privileged to be sharing in the same kind of office with people like Mr. S.D. Khongwir, a former minister of the state of government of Meghalaya, who is currently the president of the Molai town Dorbar. And I guess he is the oldest surviving hetman in the entire Meghalaya. And he has been serving as a Rangbashnong as a hetman for 53 years, to be exact. And when I discuss with him on the current pandemic, and occasionally most of the times regarding traditional institutions, he often said, I have not come across or heard of anything like this pandemic throughout the 87 years of my life. And even the fear of the Japanese invasion into our hills during the Second World War is nothing compared to the present pandemic. Talking about the position of the traditional institutions, he often laments that before December 2014, the office of the village councils or the Dorbashnongs were held with a lot of respect. He agrees that times of change, rule of law has to come into force in everyday life, but he however recounted that no force could override the importance of village councils, which have appeared from time immemorial and have naturally solidified themselves into effective concrete instruments of the community. The battle against COVID-19 has to a great degree created a new mechanics with regard to governance and public management, reviving, in the words of S.D. Honger, the good old days where the village councils are once again brought back to the forefront of community life. So from 22nd March, coming to the theme of the topic, from 22nd March 2020, when the first lockdown was announced by the government of Meghalaya or the government of India, the state administration would have already noted that practically such kind of a lockdown, unlike any other type of public disorder previously experienced, will make administrative management difficult. There are basically no ready-made formulas or any available rule books that can help to guide the administration along the way. It is in these tough circumstances that the government, as it has always been doing, turned to the village councils. And in spite of the village council almost being ridiculed as archaic institutions in modern times, yet, as had happened many times over in the past, the village councils are again the reckoning instruments to aid the government in the battle to combat COVID-19. The district administration often takes such steps on numerous occasions, simply because it has learned and recognized the actual role played by the village councils as instruments who can connect directly with the general public and the common masses. The government, with its finely charted plans and designs ready to combat COVID-19, needed them to be implemented. And hence the village councils support, collaboration alone could bring forth a meaningful results to all the government's effort in combating this pandemic. I would like to tempted to deviate a bit from this topic. It is a well-known fact that inherently indigenous communities in general are not accustomed to the kind of living of a certain set of formal norms or the sort of new legal codes to be followed in everyday life. Most indigenous communities tend to culturally survive on acquired instincts which have evolved through adaptations. Such traits still do unconsciously survive even among the modern educated groups of the indigenous people. These shared traits within the community, on a close examination, can be duly recognized by their unique sets of colloquial discussions, social perspectives, collective expectations, and many other traits which build up a completely unique set of community standard cognitive behavior. Now turning back to the finely charted plans and designs made by the government to tackle COVID-19 spread. Now these plans demand a very lucid translation in order to gain acceptance among the masses. This time the government is battling to curb the spread of a plague-like disease, not yet properly comprehended by majority of the common man in the village. Then there are plethora of presumptions and assumptions about this disease. They are discussed and debated at home and in the streets. The pandemic issue got transformed into a new narrative, and these debates usually tend to undermine the actual danger of the disease and reduce it into a kind of a myth. So such confusing yet interesting state of opinions are further accelerated in strangely or ironically nullified by platforms of social media, thereby diverting the narrative further from the very objective of the chartered designs made by the government to control this pandemic. The village councils appeared here as co-participants to these so-called street discourse. And the councils could come and play a very important, a very pivotal role to help translate and invoke these finally charted designs of the government into the mind of a common man. At least as far as I know, in Khasi Jadi Hills, the village councils at times have never been very comfortable working within the rubrics of the district administration. That, of course, owing to many unpleasant encounters between the two systems in the past. I need not remind that the village council at one time were about to be reduced into mere symbols of tradition, something that the previous speaker had also showed us. Symbols of tradition, and they are almost stripped of their functions in community life. Now, coming to the role of the village councils here during this COVID-19. This COVID-19 pandemic has caught the district administration, as I've already said, quite unprepared, because nothing of this sort had happened anywhere in the past, especially at least in the modern times. So the district administration, with its charted designs, plans, has to cannot rely on its administrative force, such as the police or the block development officers, to disseminate and impose its combating plans. The reason, of course, being obvious, there are in the battle against COVID-19, there are no groups to be blamed, or there are no issues to negotiate. And of course, worse still is that the government does not have a vaccine to treat this disease. So the government at best could make plans and compile reports, and while the implementation part and also the part that will be dealing with the physical, the social, and the psychological effect of the COVID-19 and its lockdown are simply left to the village councils. Now, some of the work that the village councils have rendered during these 3 months battle against COVID-19, which became apparent, of course, during the 3 months due to the lockdown, are the public awareness implementation, for example. So over the last 3 months, as the convener had spoken earlier at the beginning of this session, village councils are engaged on a daily basis with making announcements, creating awareness on the ills of COVID-19. But far different from these mere official announcements, there are also the form of daily lectures and counselings, along with strict warnings to violators. Then the village councils arrange local volunteers to keep strict vigil to make sure that every common man and woman adheres to the standard protocol. So the work of translating the plans of the government to disseminate the awareness about the disease, also to provide hope to the community members who are panicked, and uses its local authority in its disposal to make sure that the common man obeys the standard protocol in letter and spirit, are the daily engagements of the village councils. Daily, I mean, it's an everyday affair from morning till evening. And then the other task that the village councils were left to do is to address the economic impact of the lockdown. Here comes a heavy responsibility where every village council has to make steps to address the plight of these daily wage laborers and the economically marginalized groups who are deprived of their livelihood during this 3 months lockdown. Most villages on their own mobilizes funds to provide relief in the form of free rations and essential commodities on a regular basis for such affected families in their respective villages without any assistance from the government. Of course, despite the tall talks of the government in this regard, it has done relatively very little to address the difficulties faced by the common man during the lockdown. The reality of the 3 months lockdown has taken a heavy toll on the family means of livelihood. If we consider that 70% of people in Meghalaya, or the families, depend on non-salaried engagement for their livelihood. Through my practical experience, I can confidently say that had the village councils ignored this pertinent part, there would have been chaos and disorder, and that would have crippled the district administration's effort to tackle COVID-19. Let me bring here some figures from my own locality, my own village, or more like in the Masar, where we can showcase how much relief of free rations and food we have provided for the marginalized group, people who have been affected badly by the lockdown. Collectively, from my village alone, of 4,000 souls, of 1,300 households, we have collectively been able to help 1,174 households. We have been able to give free rice to a total amount of 9,000 kgs, 9 ton. We have distributed free potatoes for 1,000 kgs, free potatoes. We have given dal and pulses, about 400 kgs, oil, more than 500 liters, eggs, 4,000, onion, 1,300 kgs, sugar, 500 kgs, salt, and vegetables of almost 1 ton. I think these figures from a single village where I am heading as a headman and a Rangbashnan is apparent enough to explain the mental engagement which the village councils are involved in the battle to curb the spread of COVID-19 among the members of the community in communities in Meghalaya. These efforts are also common throughout East Khas Hills, among many of other village councils, as far as I know, in East Khas Hills, not to mention about Molai. And they show the mammoth involvement of the village council in addressing the effects of countering COVID-19. And of course, needless to mention, all these efforts rendered are being done as voluntary service. It may not be an overestimation to state that, an underestimation rather, to state that beyond the planning part, the entire load of responsibility falls on the shoulders of the village councils. The government could not do anything beyond the planning part. Now, the later development of the lockdown and combating this COVID-19, which the village council took up, is a management of community quarantine centers. This is a very crucial role made by the village councils. And initially, many of the localities and villages were hesitant to take up this responsibility. But slowly, every village began to establish their own community quarantine centers for its residents who returned back from other states of the country. It is general manner of which the district administration, after a preliminary examination and brief observation at the government centers, would send back these returnees to their residence and of course to the respective localities and villages. Now, in this area, the village councils are faced with the biggest challenge to deal with the 21,000 odd returnees into the state. So consider the asymptomatic nature of this disease. The village councils are pushed hard to make sure that the returnees do not intermingle with the community members within the locality or even with their family members. So even in the home quarantine or community centers, quarantine centers, these returnees are kept on a strict vigil for 14 days, isolate them from the community, and the task of monitoring all this activity is in the hands of the village councils. Now, the following figures again would give a glimpse of the involvement of the village councils in the quarantine of these returnees. For example, I have a figure from Molai. Molai is a conglomeration of 26 villages or localities. And from these 26, there are 15 villages who have started these quarantine centers, community quarantine centers, managed completely by the village councils. Now, from the 15 villages, we have 32 community quarantine centers in Molai alone, and there are 307 returnees who were actually treated or isolated in these quarantine centers. And besides that, we have about 1,500 individuals, returnees, who were quarantined at home, or what we call home quarantine. These individuals perhaps have they have the space in their own house. So normally we send them to their own respective house for quarantine, whereas those 307 were unfortunate enough to have a big space at their residence. So this becomes the responsibility of the village councils to make sure that they are isolated. And hence we put them in these community quarantine centers. Now, there are challenges. These is the above works that the village councils have been doing for the last 3 months. I would say is a success story of the role of village councils in combating COVID-19. But there are also challenges which we have undergone as members of village councils. To tackle a COVID-19-like scenario, we are, as village councils, we are rendered into something multitask responsibilities. First, at a human level, we are taking the loads of parental responsibility for the community to guide and enlighten the common people about this ongoing pandemic. As I've already stated, that the majority of people look into this pandemic as a myth. Hardly they care about the ill effect of this pandemic. With the rise in street discourse, may I use the term again, the participation of the people, the cooperation of people is getting tougher to really agree and fulfill and follow the chartered designs of the government. Now, number two, we have to disseminate the government's directives and time after time, notifications of the notifications were passed from the government side into these village councils for the smooth implementation of its chartered plans. Now, we also have to do detection of migrants or illegal migrants who are suspicious, who probably are coming from the red zones, states of the country. And beyond its own resources, the village councils are seriously engaged in mobilizing well-wishers to help mitigate the plight of these economically marginalized families.
Sir, 2 minutes to go.
Who are severely affected by the lockdown. So the preparation, management of these quarantine individuals, both for the home and community quarantine centers in terms of infrastructure arrangement, sanitization, and arrangement of basic requirement for quarantine individuals, especially those from households who are not in a position to make arrangements for isolation, becomes the burden of the village councils. So, like I said, some of the major tasks mentioned above are apparent enough on the labor, the physical, and the mental engagements which the village councils have undergone during the COVID-19 battle. In spite of this thankless role, it is painful to note that village councils, as a first speaker spoken, are legally unrecognized entities in the state till date. They have been functioning throughout as voluntary organizations, use and misuse, and have managed to survive only because tradition is still held with reverence by the people, and people still have faith and perhaps still believe in the worth of these traditional institutions. And I would say here that the constitutional provision for allowing the existence of these village councils within the ambit of the 6th schedule was born out of this realization. So the only essence, I believe, to the true democratic principles in our state, at least, survive because of the existence of these numerous village councils, institutions that called for proper legal recognition, to be financially supported, and at least to be preserved and empowered in their unique form and existence. They may be an informalized form of governance, as the previous speaker said, but they have the potential to grow and to live and work in the modern liberal democratic system. At the end, of course, I should not deny the fact that the government on its part has definitely invested a lot of its entire resources to address the COVID-19 pandemic. But while saying this, I would like to include that the facts remain. Whatever the government make effort in its plan and implementation, the entire exercise to combat the spread of the plague in our state, at least, will remain futile if the government does, if the people do not cooperate. Since the village councils are a product of a common man's aspiration for self-governance, maybe informalized manner, and with the upsurge of the COVID-19 case in our state as it stands today, the role of the village councils become even more indispensable. And it is now the time for the government to rethink and reponder as to how it can realign and reestablish a new relationship with the village councils in a more legalized, formalized manner. So in this way, the village councils can contribute. And I believe that the previous speaker's hypothesis on the non-inclusiveness of the traditional institution as a yardstick for them not being a mechanism of governance is true, no doubt. But I dare say that traditional institutions, especially in the urban and suburban and near urban areas, have actually evolved into a well-knitted system of inclusiveness. And I believe that it will be really wonderful to see that these traditional institutions are being empowered and put into a formalized system of governance for which the government at the end would benefit greatly. So this is what I have to say for the role of the traditional institutions in the combating COVID-19, and also many other issues in which the village councils have always been used by the government in its as agencies. And if you get the results of the government's effort in implementing many of the projects or many of the policies, no one understands, but the village councils are actually playing the most crucial role in that process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for sharing your thoughts and your feelings on the performances of the government so far. And it was particularly very encouraging to hear the report on the constructive activities and programs of the village Dorbar in Molai, and to hear of the many contributions that it has made to managing COVID-19 in the locality and in the Molai Kanton Masar area. Thank you so much, sir, for your presentation. We will now go over to Ba'arden. He comes with a lot of experiences, and he has been in the chair and in the leadership position for some time. So we will go over to Ba'arden for his presentation now. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Jacob. I would also like to thank Reverend Brother Albert, the principal of St. Louis College, Father Joby Joseph, and also Sir R. Purkayastha, the head of department, political science, St. Louis College. At the outset, I wish to thank the Department of Political Science, St. Louis College, for taking this initiative in holding this deliberation today, and also for having me as one of the speakers. I hope that this discussion will go a long way to enlighten the students and the people in general regarding the role of traditional institutions in our state in managing crisis like what we are experiencing for the past few months. The decision to bring in the role of traditional institutions in this deliberation is obviously very pertinent and important. Well, I have been given the task to dwell on the prospect of recognition and empowerment of the grassroots traditional institution, a perspective which I personally feel is long overdue and much needed. As a matter of fact, we had already started a movement to enlighten the people on the need to empower traditional institutions in line with the provisions of Article 371A and G, a special provision for the state of Nagaland and Mizoram, respectively. Before we proceed in our discussion, let me briefly explain the political history of the Khasis as a community. Firstly, I would like to state that we were never a part of Assam and India before the Britishers set their feet on these hills. The Khasi already had their own unique, distinct, and well-established form of governance. It is something that evolved from within the community and which is in fact the best form of governance. Our forefathers perhaps understood fully well that power corrupts and that absolute power corrupts absolutely. Therefore, a traditional chief or ruler was not vested with absolute power to govern over his subjects, and real power rested with the people. Even the Britishers noticed this peculiarity that existed in the political system of the Khasis. According to the observations made by British administrators, which was also described in the book written by Dr. Helen Geary titled The Khasis, they observed, I quote, that form of government or society existing among the Khasis is the absence of any recognized organ of supreme power, which is remarkable. They show no particular courtesy of bearing towards their Rajas. Indeed, the latter do not seem to have much power, unquote. Also in the book written by Sir Kate Cantley, namely Notes on Khasi Law, And to be more specific, in chapter 17, there was also a mention, I quote, that in a Khasi state, a sheep is nothing without the Dorbar, unquote. Therefore, as a community, the Khasis never lag behind in matters relating to administration and governance, and had embraced true democracy since time immemorial. So is the case with traditional institutions or Dorbarshnam, where power is not vested in the individual, but lies with the people. The head of the traditional body is only implementing decisions adopted by the Dorbar through the executive committee appointed by the Dorbar. A Dorbar here means the body comprises of all members of the village or locality, except minors. Some may disagree with me on the context that women are not allowed to participate in the affairs of the community. However, that was not exactly the case in the beginning. It was by choice, not by force, for women to stay out of Dorbar. The Khasis had already practiced the theory of division of responsibilities between men and women, where men are tasked with the responsibility to fend for the family and to look after the welfare of the society. And whereas women are being tasked to manage the family and all domestic issues. They control the finance for the management of the family and are responsible for household daily affairs. Therefore, there is no hard and fast rule for women in the Khasi society to stay out of the Dorbar. Even till today, there is a popular opinion among women that it is the duty and responsibility of men to participate in the daily affairs of the community. Most women are reluctant to come forward and shoulder the responsibility in community service. Hence, it has been a tradition for women in the Khasi society not to be actively involved in governance and political processes. Since traditional bodies are functioning and guided by the goodwill of the villages, even traditional heads and members of the executive committee are working voluntarily for the welfare of the village and the locality. Their only interest is the well-being of the villagers and the village or the locality as a whole. There is always a consensus on any issue, and the participation of the people in the Dorbar or the council is very enthusiastic. It used to be a normal practice of the village or the locality to choose from among them the eldest male member who is respectable, reliable, and wise person to be the head of the village or the locality. That is why the head of the village or the locality is known as Uttamenshnam. The Khasis, while conducting the Dorbar or the council, always maintain highest decorum and discipline in their deliberation. There is no scope for any member to take this deliberation lightly in the Dorbar. And the amount of seriousness was such that any unparliamentary words or expression would be expunged. Traditional bodies do not have much problem to manage or solve any issue which may arise in the society because of the support and cooperation they receive from people. There is a general feeling among the people that they are part and parcel of these institutions. Therefore, it would be unbecoming on their part to not follow or adhere to the instructions given by the Dorbar. As we are aware, and as has been stated by the previous speakers, Meghalaya is one of the states in India that performed really well in the initial stage in its fight against COVID-19. And this can be attributed to the role played by traditional bodies in the state. As there is always a room for improvement in any community, the Khasi community also witnessed improvement in the functioning of these traditional institutions. We have seen that with the passage of time, these traditional bodies have come to accept the role played by groups and organizations, such as women groups and youth organizations. These groups and organizations at times played as vigilant bodies to check and keep track on the functioning and working of the Rangbachnong or Hetman and the executive committee of the Dorbar. Hence, I strongly feel that there is an urgent need to create an awareness among the people on the importance of empowering traditional institutions. As of now, these bodies largely function at the mercy of the government. And the government make use of these institutions according to their whims and fancies. A case in point is the recent denial of permission by the district administration for the Dorbar to hold a community worship in their respective localities. I know that there are many who are apprehensive about the issue of empowering traditional institutions. They are of the opinion that these traditional institutions are becoming so corrupted, are not democratic, and are answerable to none. I will partially agree with their sentiments. However, I feel that we cannot paint every institution with the same brush just because some of these institutions have failed to deliver and perform their duties as they are supposed to do. In fact, there are many of these institutions which really perform and people benefited despite many difficulties and hardship they have to encounter with. What we see today in the functioning of some Dorbar is perhaps the present trend due to the absence of prescribed rules and regulation to guide their functioning. The actual state of affairs of these traditional bodies supposed to be democratic in nature. It is supposed to be transparent. It is supposed to be accountable. And it is also supposed to be respectable and conducive for members of the society to come forward and actively involved in its processes. However, it is very unfortunate that these institutions are left to rot and lose their sheen due to the indifferent attitude of those who are at the helm of affairs. It seems to me that the government is deliberately shying away from conferring constitutional status to these traditional institutions for fear of losing control over these institutions. The incorporation of the 6th schedule to the Constitution of India to provide a measure of self-government in the tribal areas was not a free gift. It was after so much of debates, arguments, and counter-arguments put forth by members representing the tribal people in the Constituent Assembly. J.G.M. Nichols Roy, who was also known as an architect of the 6th schedule, in his submission to the Constituent Assembly, had made a very strong point to allow the tribal people to grow according to their own genius, tradition, and practices. And for the benefit of the participants and the audience, I would like to read out a few paragraphs from his submission to the Constituent Assembly, which reads, I quote, I, being myself being a hillman, know what I feel. Being a Christian, I want universal brotherhood everywhere. I want this in the whole of India and in the fold of the tribal people also. Therefore, when I speak in this house, I speak with the knowledge of the feeling of hill tribes. I speak also with a sense of universality and brotherhood of mankind. I speak keeping in mind the high ideal of raising all people to the same level. It is said by one honorable gentleman that the hill tribes have to be brought to the culture which he said are culture, meaning the culture of the plainsmen. But what is culture? Does it mean dress or eating and drinking? If it means eating and drinking or ways of living, the hill tribes can claim that they have a better system than some of the people in the plains. I think the latter must rise up to their standard. Among the tribesmen, there is no difference between class and class. Even the Rajas and chiefs work in the fields together with their laborers. They eat together. Is that practiced in the plains? The whole of India has not reached that level of equality. Do you want to abolish that system? Do you want to crush them and their culture must be swallowed by the culture which says one man is lower and another higher? You say I am educated and you are uneducated, and because of that you must sit at my feet? That is not the principle among the hill tribes. When they come together, they all sit together, whether educated or uneducated, high or low. The government report is that the people of the hills have their own culture, which is sharply differentiated from that of the plains. The social organization is that of the village, the clan, and the tribe, and the outlook and structure are generally strongly democratic. So that is the culture of the hill tribes. India should rise up to that feeling of our idea of equality and real democracy, which the tribal people have. They should not for a second think that these people should give up their democracy and equality and be swallowed up by another culture, which is quite different from what they have been used to, and which is considered by them not at all suitable to their society. Unquote. The importance of the administration at the grassroots and local level is also being felt by the government of India. It realized that a proper implementation of schemes, programs, and policies can be achieved only through the participation of the people at the local level. Therefore, a 73rd Amendment Act was enacted in 1992 to pave way for the administration at the local and grassroots level. However, the government of India is making exemption to the tribal states, including Meghalaya, since it is aware about the existence of these traditional bodies. The government of India does not want to go against the sentiments of the local indigenous population. And they have also seen that these traditional institutions have been able to withstand the test of time. Since the tribal people are very proud of their tradition and practices, they will oppose any move to replace it with a new system. The statement made by the former governor of Meghalaya, Shri M. Jacob, during his inaugural address at a sub-regional workshop on Panchati Ranch in Shillong, organized by the Indian Council of Social Science Research, that I quote, there is no Panchayati Raj system in Meghalaya, but the traditional tribal community, village and social structures have deep roots. Has further taken the principle and ideology of the Khasi's political system to a higher platform. Let us also not forget that these traditional institutions are not merely facilitators as far as the implementation of government schemes and programs are concerned. However, they are the shield that can protect and preserve the Khasi community in terms of survival, culture, and way of life. Therefore, it is important for us to learn that what we witness today in the functioning of these traditional institutions is one that has departed from the original concept and ideas of the Khasi's understanding of governance. The sorry state of affairs in our state, with Khasi Giant Hills in particular, is the deterioration in the manner in which these traditional bodies are functioning. With the changing times and the absence of any mechanism to protect these traditional bodies from the influence of political and monetary pressure, the focus and objectives of these bodies have drifted away from what they are supposed to be. No doubt, there is a growing discontentment among the people with regards to the performance of these institutions in the present day. However, one cannot jump to the conclusion that these traditional bodies are becoming useless and redundant. The problem is not the institution, but the person that runs the institution. We should not lose sight of the fact that man is more important than the machine. No matter how good the institution is, but when the ones who manage are incompetent, weak, corrupt, the institution on its own will not be able to produce any good result. There can be no other authority that understands the pulse, the sentiments, and the feeling of the local people better than the traditional bodies or the Dorvashna. Therefore, to allow these bodies to become weak or agencies of government only would be a great disservice to the indigenous community, and there would be a serious repercussion. Hence, it is the duty of each one of us to strive for the empowerment and constitutional recognition for these traditional bodies. From what we learned and understand, our forefathers had put in place a political system which is well balanced and truly democratic. However, it is our failure to preserve and respect them, which is why we are now facing social disharmony and sense of insecurity. We are too forgiving as the community that we never want to right the wrong committed by leaders in the community. As a result, members of the society start losing faith and confidence in the functioning of these traditional institutions. As you are aware that lately we had launched a revolution in the name of Yada Lakari, where we have prioritized the issue of empowering traditional institution or Dorvashna as the first and foremost agenda of this revolution. The Article 371A and G respectively
Sir, 3 minutes to go.
prevents the interference of central laws in matters relating to social religious practices of the Nagas and Mizos, administration of civil and criminal justice according to the customary laws of the Nagas and Mizos, ownership of and transfer of land and its resources. If Meghalaya, for that matter, comes under the purview of this special provision, many issues and problems that emerges from time to time due to the feeling of insecurity in the minds of the indigenous people would automatically be addressed. It is necessary, therefore, for the Khasis to realize that empowering our traditional institution under the said article is the need of the hour. These traditional bodies should also be insulated from party politics and free from political interference. Coming to the present situation, where government has to deal with this global pandemic and implementing measures to prevent the spread of this disease. Again, the role of traditional institutions comes into play and has proven beyond doubt their effectiveness. Even though the state government chooses not to give them much credit, the fact remains that the people of the state are aware and witness the contribution made by these traditional institutions to fight against this deadly virus. And without them, the situation might have been uncontrollable by now. Despite limited resources, villages or localities have been able to manage the situation arising out of this pandemic successfully. With this, I would like to conclude my submission. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arden, for that broad overview. And you've also given us the essence, the role, the functions, the challenges faced by the traditional institutions in Meghalaya and in other parts of the country. Thank you very much, sir, for your presentation and for your very, as somebody has said, very fluent and eloquent, forceful presentation on the traditional institutions in Meghalaya. We have enough time now for questions. So before we go over to Professor Bright for the Q&A session, I would just like to give our speakers a few seconds to react or to respond to any of the presentation given by the other speakers, or maybe you want to add something to what you've already said. Just a few lines before we go to the Q&A session. And in the meantime, we would like to tell our attendees that the feedback form link is now available on the chat box. You can see the chat, you can see the link and click on it, fill the feedback form, and we will be able to send you your certificates as soon as we receive your feedback forms. Now, please remember, you must give your correct details and ensure that the spelling of your name is correct, and also that you have given us the correct email ID so that we will be able to send you your certificates. So the link is available right now on the chat box. Now, very quick response before Professor Bright takes over for the Q&A session. Sir, any one of you, starting with Marbo or Dr. Marbo, any response, any reaction that you would like to give to the presentation given by other speakers, or you would like to add to your own presentation? Anything by Dr. Marbo? Please unmute yourself. I would like to request all speakers to unmute yourself so that we'll be able to get a spontaneous response.
I would rather love to get the questions from the participants instead of adding more to.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Yeah. Okay. Dr. Mitri, anything you would like to add? Any responses? Any reaction?
I would like to respond to Dr. Mirbo. I know we are both academicians, but Dr. Mirbo, don't you think it's high time we rise above this Eurocentric idea of inclusive democracy? Why can't our democratic principles, democratic system be allowed to evolve in a better shape, and the government will be, supporting from the side ends? Because today we've been speaking at academic level based completely on the Eurocentric thinking on parameters built on what is democracy. However, the time must come as Orient, we tend to be a little different in our attributes now, understanding of the mechanism of governance. And I believe that it is high time that we drift ourselves away and instead become the new arbiter to the kind of democratic principles which is being refined, fine-tuned, and perhaps, you never know, the world may just adopt it once again and make it a better system of governance globally. That's all.
Very interesting point. Dr. Marbot.
Okay, I would like to give my response to that. You see, I did not give my independent position, rather. The statement that I made earlier was in the context of the word governance that was put in my topic. And since the word governance itself come from Europe, so the very term that was used in this seminar is Eurocentric. So, but I made a point in my conclusion that there is a need for the government of India and the state government to be more accommodative to the traditional institutions, given the fact that we are the tribal people with our own distinct traditions and cultures. And therefore, to expect the tribal societies and the tribal communities to strictly adhere to the principles of liberal democracy, I feel that that is too much an asking also. And therefore, in the conclusion, I'm not that different from Professor Markumitri.
Thank you. Okay, very quickly to Arden, if he has one quick reaction or response that he would like to give.
I don't have much to say, but what I feel is that almost all the speakers have come to the common ground that traditional bodies needs to be empowered, needs to be recognized constitutionally by the government of India.
Okay, so before I hand this over to Bright Star, I would just like to request our attendees, please check that you have given us the correct format. If you have registered, please, on the feedback form, please note that you have registered for this webinar. If you have not, then please identify as such. And please ensure that the spelling of your name and the other details are correct. And also, please ensure that you have given us the correct email ID. Over to you, Professor Bright Starwell, for the Q&A session. And sirs, we would like to throw a lot of questions at you. There are a lot of questions on the chat box. Over to you, Bright Star.
Hello, good evening. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. A very good evening to one and all, and especially for the panelists for the enlightened speeches that they have been given. I hope we all have benefited from their presentation. And now we are coming to the Q&A session. And I would like to direct the first question to Dr. Batskem. And the question was sent by Dhiraj. And the question goes like this. A major factor for the weakening of the traditional bodies is the autonomous district councils. Instead of empowering them, the ADCs never played a proactive role to strengthen the traditional Dorbars. The traditional heads or Rangba Shinong came under the ADCs, but has there ever been any orientation program held for them?
Regarding the activities of the Autonomous District Council, whether they have conducted the orientation program, not for the Rangba Shnong and the Nokmas, to be frank, I don't have much an idea about such kind of program. But definitely, I would agree with the question that Autonomous District Councils in the state of Meghalaya, instead of serving the purpose, which is to allow the people in the state to flourish in accordance with the customs and traditions which they have inherited from the past. But these councils, they have clipped the wings of the traditional institutions and they have made them as the subordinate bodies to propagate their own agenda. And therefore, the traditional institutions, while on the one hand, they have not been made as the institution of local government and to be the force in the process of governance, but the wings have been clipped in a number of ways.
Thank you, Dr. Batskem. And I would like to pose another question sent by Daivel Suski to Dr. Marco. And the question is, in this pandemic, what are the difficulties as Arang Bachnong to bring the adjustment and settlement in terms of governance to engage with the state-based institutions?
Thank you for the question. Yes, I will not deny the fact, as I said, that the state has also played its infinite role, whatever resources they have at its disposal, to support these traditional institutions, right? But when we face as Dorbashno, as I have said, in the street discourse, this pandemic, this disease, because of too much of information shared in the social media, has somehow become a myth. You know, it becomes like issues of conspiracy arises that somehow drift away the danger of this disease. So while the state government is making all effort, you know, through its chartered designs and plans to make the people aware and using the Dovashnam to disseminate this awareness, there's a dual role for us to play. First thing, we have to oblige with the directives of the state government. We want to, if not oblige, but we want to see that the directives of state governments are implemented in letter spirit. And to get this, invoke this idea into the minds of the people, we have to participate into these street discourse with the people. And sometimes we caught up in a dual personality kind of situation, by which at one end we perform as professional arbiters of law, people who would throw these directives into the common people. And at the other side, we are also part of the discussion to really ridicule these kinds of directives of the government. So that is the major difficulty. I'm telling you, each and every Rangbashnong understands fully and well that directives, the protocols are to be followed because they are meant for preventive measures. But again, the same people that we are trying to implement, trying to enforce, or rather request them to follow, we are part of the same group, sometimes that we belittle these kind of directives. So thank God there are still people who continue to adhere to the role, to the directives of the government in letter and spirit, you know, agreeing completely with what the Darbashnong has to say, or accepting the authority of the Rangbashnong as the translators for these governments and directives. But there are people, again, who do not. And this is, I think it's more in the villages, for which you start saying that the villages, either because of the situation of time that perhaps this COVID-19 has not reached these rural areas, or for any other reasons, I could see that the village councils in the villages are having even a seriously difficult time to implement these directives of the government. Whereas in the rural areas, like we have in the suburbs around Shillong, the directives are already understood by the people through obedience, by simply obeying. But in that, we have to instill a bit of fear in them. And instilling a bit of fear would again create another problem for us, to curb the panic among the residents. So these are some of the serious problems by which the village council alone, in their own wisdom and knowledge, will have to address. And that's why I keep on saying, the village councils alone are the people who can translate the chartered designs of the government to make any meaningful results and to give effectiveness to whatever the government desires in its process of combating COVID-19. That's it.
Thank you, Ba Marco. And now we have a question for Ba Arden. And I was expecting this question also. And the question was sent by two persons, one by Dheeraj, but it's almost the same, and Alpha Mary Kurba. And the question is, which Alpha Mary had sent, is that she said that, I believe in the statement, mothers run the home in the best way. So why can't women get the opportunity in playing some roles in traditional in traditional institutions or Dorbar Shinong, they might be an asset to the culture or the society?
Well, I have already anticipated that someone will ask me this question. That is why, in the course of my speech, I had made a mention that it was by choice, not by force. The Khasi community had already practiced the theory of division of responsibility. So, and we see that with the passage of time, with changing times, these traditional bodies have come to accept, as I said, the role played by groups and organizations. And as a community, we don't prevent anyone to shoulder the responsibility if one is willing and one is interested in participating in community service or in any field. Let me remind that when I was the chief executive member, I think we have made a history where we made the lady as the first chairperson of the district council. We have to understand that tradition is not static, it is dynamic. It changes according to the change of time. And when the people of the state or the area have accepted anyone to shoulder the responsibility, there is no such hard and fast rule that women will be kept out of the affairs of the Dorbar or the community affairs.
And now I have a question. I'd like to go to Dr. Batman. And yes, thank you, Baden. And now I would like to pose this question to Dr. Batskem. And the question was sent by Mickey. So Batskem, I would like to ask a question on why does the Dorbar Shinongs does not have a single administrative system throughout the whole state?
Thank you for the question. You look at the traditional institutions, the very name itself suggests that they are based on traditions. The tradition of the people from one part of the state is different to another part of the state. They are not the same. Even, for example, among the Khasis, the tradition of the people in Riboy would be different from the tradition of the people, say, like in Chandy Hills or in southern parts of the East Khasi Hills. And therefore, these variations within the tradition is bound to bring the differences in how the traditional institutions at the village level, they are organized. That is one factor. The second factor for this lack of uniformity in how the traditional institutions, they run the administration is because, as I stated during the presentation, the lack of any proper legal measure or a law prescribing how these traditional institutions should be organized and what are the machineries that are to be created within these institutions. These are the two factors I feel they are responsible for the divergence of the manner in which the traditional institutions are being organized and run. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Batskem. And another question, I would like to pose this one to Marco. And the question was sent by Dalanti Christine Lanong, whereby she asks, don't you think it is easier for your Darbar to disperse information regarding COVID-19 as Kenton Masar is one community-based locality? Further, how did you manage to fund the essentials distributed by your Darbar?
It is easy, no doubt. Through the public announcement system, it's easy through the public announcement system to disseminate this information of the government to the public. It's easier said than done, I would say. Because as I said again in the beginning, that these announcements and not just mere announcements, because they come from the office of the Darbar Shnong, maybe through the voice of the hetman or the secretary or whoever members of the village council. So these easier said than done, that the announcement can be made, because they have to be in the form of lectures, in the form of counselings, in the form of lessons. So in a community-based system, you may see practically, it sounds very simple to say that information has been passed, information has been announced, but how many would really grasp those information unless they are presented in such a way with the voice of the village council, and also presented as you are doing to your own children. So this is the kind of role we do. Your second question, this is what you said. You could see again from my village alone, we have provided free relief of rations. Talk about just rice alone, about 9 tons. Perhaps we were one of the largest distributor. There are others also. So how do we mobilize? The effort, this comes again from the people. This again is a very interesting phenomenon, because the people within the locality themselves observe the kind of mental, physical, and psychological engagements and labor that we have engaged ourselves during this lockdown and COVID-19 pandemic combating. Perhaps it just comes spontaneously without us urging them, without us asking for any help. They just come willfully as an offerings of goodwill to the office of the Darbar Shnong, giving their donations, and also with a strict adherence to the fact that we should not make their donation public. This is a very beautiful thing about the Darbar Shnong. So if Darbar Shnongs are playing a role, a very transparent role in the minds of Arden, we expect a very ideal kind of situation through the Darbar Shnong. So if Darbar Shnong actually are participating in the public life very actively, without any kind of grudge over their responsibility, I believe the people at large in the community and in the village would certainly come forward, and encouraging the village council to work further, and their expression of that encouragement is in the form of these kinds of well-wishing gifts, which comes either in cash or in kind, through which we become again the instruments to look for people who are the marginalized group and then could distribute. So we take the credit as a village council of distributing these free essential relief and rations for the poor and the needy. Yet at the same time, I should thank the general community members. And that itself is an expression of the fact that if we really move, in which I would put into the statement of Dr. Matskanambo, we have the potential to evolve into a better system of governance, of course, again, but we need the Darbar Shnong to really perform in a transparent, in a more enlightened manner, for which we gain the trust of the people. Once we gain such kind of trust, we are able to give back to the people who are in need, and hence we become the buffer between the community, and the village councils could grow in this manner. So we are able to help the needy and the low-income group people, those who have seriously been affected by lockdown, through the support of the local people, of our own community members themselves, not without any kind of requests. They just willfully come on their own, seeing the role that we have played, the responsibility we have taken up during this COVID-19.
Thank you, Marco. And now we'll have one final question. I'm so sorry to all the participants who have been sending many questions, but we don't have much time. And finally, we'll take one last question. And this one is to Ba Arden, sent by Sharailin So Lang. And the question which she had sent is, what are the measures and steps that should be taken in order to curb corruption in the traditional local bodies or the Darbar Shnongs, and how do they ensure accountability to the community as a whole?
Well, I have two answers for that question. First and foremost, we need to ensure that these traditional bodies are not functioning as self-styled organizations, because till today they have not been empowered, so they still remain a self-styled body. They are not falling under any authority, so they are not accountable. And secondly, let me remind of what Machiavelli said, that if we want to root out corruption, it all depends on the society. If as a society we accept corruption as normal, then we will not be able to fight corruption. But if the society reject and rise up against corruption, we will be able to eliminate corruption from the functioning of these traditional bodies and from the state as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you to all the participants who have sent the questions, and also to the panelists who had clarified whatever question had been asked from them. And now I would like to hand over to Sir Jacob. Sir, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Bright Starwell Marabanyang, for handling the Q&A session and for asking those questions to our speakers. And thank you, sirs, for answering those questions. We have now come to the end of our webinar. I will invite Mr. Recordius Karbani, Assistant Professor of the Postgraduate Department of Political Science at St. Anthony's College, to propose the vote of thanks.
Thank you, sir, for the time. As we progress towards the conclusion of this online deliberation on the grassroots governance and the involvement of the grassroots traditional institutions in the delivery of services to the people of Meghalaya, with special reference to the management of the COVID-19 pandemic, I am pleased to express few words of gratitude to all who have been responsible for making this thought-building exercise a reality. On behalf of the Department of Political Science, St. Anthony's College, I would like to express my gratitude to the Rector of the College, Reverend Father Dr. Joby Joseph, SDB, for all supports and services that he has rendered in the process of organizing this program and for leading us into prayer at the beginning. I would like to express my immense gratitude to the principal of the college, Reverend Brother Dr. Albert Langley Dhar, for the leadership, encouragement, and support that he has given to us, and for giving a warm welcome to everyone to this webinar. I am grateful to the head of the Department of Political Science, Dr. Rakhal Kumar Purkayastha, for providing us the leadership and support in organizing this program and for delivering the introductory note to this program. This webinar would have not been possible without the willingness of the three panelists to contribute their researches, experiences, thoughts, and perspectives on the issues pertaining to our society. I believe that most attendees are enthralled by their presentations. I have already seen many messages of appreciations and thanks in the chat box. As such, the Department of Political Science, St. Anthony's College, and the college as a whole owe a ton of gratitude to Dr. Batske Marbo, Dr. Marco Babit Pitri, and Ba Arden Miller Basiamoy for their priceless contributions. My gratefulness goes also to the IQAC of St. Anthony's College and St. Anthony's College Bindi Hati for the collaboration in organizing this webinar. I would like to thank Sir Nathaniel Majau, Assistant Professor, Mass Media Department, St. Anthony's College, for providing us the technical supports, thus making it possible for us to be virtually connected. To Sir Jacob Shela, thank you so much for proficiently moderating the webinar. And to my colleagues in the Department of Political Science, particularly Sir Bright Starwell Marabanyang, thank you for your contributions and involvement in making this webinar a reality. I am grateful to the support staffs of St. Anthony's College, especially Babu Ram Sharma and our friend Bhabok Lendok Longlait and his friends for providing the much needed services. And we are enormously grateful to all participants who have virtually and passionately participated in this program, from areas far and near. For those who have directed questions to the panelists and others who are watching and will be watching this webinar on computers and portable devices, thank you all. To sum up, I would like to express my gratefulness to all who have been involved directly and indirectly in this seminar. Thank you. Evermore, better ever.
Well, the problem of delivering the vote of thanks is that you don't get to thank yourself. So we're going to thank you, Mr. Recordius Kharbani, for thanking all of us. And so that's it from all of us at St. Anthony's College, Shillong. Good evening. Thank you very much, Kublai Shibone. God bless you evermore, better ever. Over and out. While we're still signing out, attendees, please remember you have to fill up your feedback forms. The link is still available online. Fill up your feedback forms and send your feedback forms as early as possible. Ensure that that your email ID is correct and that your names are spelled correctly. Thank you so much. God bless you.